The best of Money Matters. The Hot Seat.
Welcome to the Hot Seat. I'm your host, Hongbin Jeong. The general elections in Singapore is just around the corner. From the rising cost of living to calls for political change, what do voters really want this time? So on the Hot Seat today, we're having a GE2025 panel discussion, where three guests from across the generational spectrum, Gen X, Millennial, and Gen Z, are joining me as we ask the big questions which could potentially shape up what the future of Singapore would look like in the next 5 years. But before we hear from our guests and dive deeper into this discussion, here's a disclaimer. The views presented by our interviewees do not necessarily reflect their personal beliefs or opinions. Instead, they are here to provide a fresh perspective on the topic at hand. So without further ado, joining us today to represent the Gen Zs is Tan Jing, who is a Gen Z public speaker, followed by Keith Yap, who's the founder of the Front Row Media, who will be representing the Millennials. And finally, representing the Gen Xs is Cheryl Miles, founder of the Miles Nixon Media. Welcome to the Hot Seat, everybody.
Hello.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, thanks for having us.
Thank you so much for joining me. All right, so to start off, I want to ask all of you, what are the top 3 issues voters in your generation would like to see being addressed in this year's general election? Cheryl, maybe we can start off with you.
I think the most pressing concern, of course, is the Trump tariffs and how that's going to impact our economy. But I guess the top 3, that aside, would be for my generation: retirement adequacy, job security, which I think is really close to our hearts, because I've had friends who are facing retrenchment, have been retrenched. And the third thing, I guess, for everyone would be cost of living and housing as well. So in that respect, though, I would say, as a midlifer, as a Gen Xer, I think this is like actually the time of our lives where we feel like we're the most powerful, the most purposeful. And, you know, Gen X still has a lot to offer the economy and to the country as well. And it's sad that we're kind of in that sort of stage where some of us do need to upskill and, you know, and take on some maybe technical skills that we may be lacking and things like that. But I feel like there needs to be more of a strategic placement of midlifers, because we have a lot of experience and also a lot of knowledge and expertise and leadership qualities. So, yeah, that's close to my heart.
All right. What about Keith? What are millennials looking for?
Well, nothing focuses a nation like a crisis, right? So in 2020, we saw the pandemic become like the pandemic elections. We also saw that was the election where there was an introduction of greater political diversity. We had PSP, we had the Workers' Party and the PAP come into the parliament. So now we've really stepped into a new reality of a much more politically diverse parliament. So when I, as a millennial, step into 2025, the huge thing that's on everyone's mind, I think what Cheryl talks about is like the global macro uncertainty. And obviously it's going to play a huge role in this election. And if I were to kind of like really understand the problem at hand, I would say that it's 3 things, right, that comes with this macro uncertainties. One is you have job insecurity. I think Cheryl pointed that out. 2 is wage stagnation, whether your wages will continue to grow. And then the third point is the rising inequality. So if the parties that are coming and contesting these elections can address these 3 problems, I think we'll get to see a really exciting elections.
Okay. Well, Jing, what about the Gen Zs?
I would say that for our Gen Zs, we are in a very exciting time, because especially for this year's election, we have 2 kinds of Gen Zs. We have the first-time voters like myself, right? We are going in, we are so excited to vote for the first time, right? And we also have some of our other Gen Z friends who have maybe voted once or twice already. Some of them who have voted in the 2020 elections or in the recent presidential elections. So I would say that there are a lot of diverse concerns and needs that the parliament has to address for us Gen Zs. So if there were 3 issues that I think that Gen Zs want to really hope the government can address, it would be these 3. The first, I think, for across all generations, is our rising costs, right? Things are getting expensive. I just had a banana shake this afternoon. It was not very cheap, guys. Yeah, so hopefully that the government will be able to do something, not only for food, but also for, I would rather say, different sectors. Hopefully there can be some cost mitigation on our end. Next one would definitely be jobs. A lot of my friends, we are going out into the job market. Everyone is saying that the market is really, really bad. So if there are different ways that the government can help us to upskill, improve our employability, that will definitely help us a lot. And thirdly would be housing. Because just like myself, my other friends, we are all very excited to go out into the world, And of course, we need a roof to stay under, right? So whether is it the BTO, whether is it trying to manage house costs, if the government have different measures to help us, that would be really, really useful.
Right. Well, it looks like across all generation, the rising cost of living is a top concern. Cheryl, a popular school of thought is a claim that the older generation has it easier because back then everything was cheap. So as someone from Gen X, how would you respond to that? And what do you think political parties today should be doing to address rising costs in a way that's fair to both older and younger generations? Or are the current policies and support to tackle the rising cost of living enough?
So first of all, I don't really think Gen X is the older generation.
That's true.
Yeah, thank you for that. I feel like, it's the Merdeka generation would be my mom and my dad's generation that really laid the foundation for the country. And I wouldn't say it was easier for them either because it was post-war and they had their own fair share of struggles. And just like my generation and today's generation also. So I don't think we should compare like who's cheaper and whatever because there are a lot of opportunities present today for today's generation that I didn't have when I was growing up. But I guess to answer your question, what I would like to see in the future, and just going back to what Jing said as well about for you guys coming out into the world and finding affordable housing is because, so I got married very late and I got my first flat when I was 41. And as you know now, like the single scheme is the minimum age is 35, which I think is too old.
Right.
And I would like to see the age drop down to like maybe something like 28 or something like that, and maybe like a co-living situation where singles can get together and live together and, and start forming other life skills that you only get when you are living on your own, right? The other thing that I would also like to see is, so in my generation, I think one thing that impacts the Gen X is career transitions, either the fear of being redundant or having to upskill and all of that. And so sometimes this transition can lead to maybe those starting a consultancy or joining the gig economy, as we call it, right? And I read this stat that said there's 1 in 5 gig workers in Singapore. And I feel like this also correlates to how few Singaporeans are actually prepared for our retirement. And I would like to see a bit more support, I suppose, for gig workers in terms of CPF support or some kind of, wage increase. I think we can all agree that we would like more money.
Of course, we all love money.
Yes. And third thing, just to close off with this, is that economic stress leads to emotional stress, right? And I feel like the mental health challenges that we're facing in a climate where, the economy is uncertain and everything, we really need to pay attention to our well-being and also how we handle the stress. And I feel like more can be done in this area.
I see. Well, Keith, you're in the middle since you're a millennial here and you're seated right in the middle as well. And millennials, they're dubbed as the sandwich generation, juggling rising costs while possibly taking care of a young family. So what key messages do you think that people your age would be looking out for in order to help you decide your vote?
I'd like to first add to what Jing shared earlier about housing costs. I think if you look at the inflation data for the past 2 years, like just the past year, core inflation was about 2.4 to 2.7%. But your housing, especially in terms of resale flat, you're hitting about 10% in terms of price increase. So I think bulk of the inflation anxiety that many people feel, millennials and Gen Z, is like really concentrated around the housing costs, right? If you want to buy a resale flat, if it's the price is increasing at 10% per year, it's really worrying. So I think a lot of people are concerned about that. So that definitely factors in. But I think there is another point that might be interesting. There's this book, which I'm sure wonderful listeners of 89.3 FM might want to check out. It's called The Demographic Reversal. It's by these two economists that's really studying how demographies affect inflation. And their key thesis was essentially that as populations age, your labor supply will start to shrink. And with that, you will enter into an era of chronically inflationary environments. Meaning, Singapore, as we age, as more of us age, and Singapore is definitely an aging society, we will be entering actually into worse inflation coming up. And I think that's a huge concern for many of us who need to care for young families and our older parents. So I think the political parties coming up in this general elections should really look ahead in the next 5 to 10 years with an aging population and aging society. How are we going to actually cushion the cost of caring for the elderly parents, making sure that, we can make it sustainable to care for them, but at the same time, the government can give more support to younger families like myself, right? So if we are able to, take care of our kids and take care of our parents well, I think the sandwich will be more delicious in that sense.
All right. Well, Jing, and many young Singaporeans feel that despite working hard, owning a home and starting a family are increasingly out of reach. Do you feel that your generation is being priced out of the Singapore dream? Is your generation still trying to achieve the 5 C's, which is cash, car, credit card, condominium, and a country club membership? I mean, what policy support is your generation looking for in this regard?
Wow, man, oh man. I really think, right, that for us Gen Zs, it's really not just about the 5 C's anymore. Because I would say that we Gen Zs are born in the world of opportunities. And not only because we have social media, but because I think we're really grateful to be born in a Singapore where we are thriving, we have so many more developments, and we have a lot more opportunities to try different things. So I would say that what our Gen Zs really hope that the government can give us is different flexibility in terms of perhaps as we chase different jobs. So for example, I was speaking to some of my friends today. I was asking them, like, what would you guys want to do in the future? And some of them, they were really giving me so many different, ideas of what their future look like. Some of them want to be entrepreneurs. Some of them want to join the gig economy. Some of them still want to work in a 9 to 5. And I think that is perfectly okay. But the issue here is that there are going to be so many different dreams that we want to chase anymore. It's no longer about the 5 C's, but it's about what each individual wants to achieve. So I'm hoping that if the government is able to come up with different policies to really help us to achieve our dreams as much as they can, I would say that we'll be really, really so grateful. And one more point I really think is very important is the idea of purpose. Because we Gen Zs, we really believe in the idea of purpose, having something to work towards. So if the government is able to listen to what we Gen Zs want to achieve in our life and help us align to that and achieve our goals, we'll be really so happy and so grateful.
Sounds fair enough. Well, still the rising cost of living here, one thing that has an immediate impact is the GST hike, right? Which we've seen gradually increase from 7% to 9% over the last 2 years. So to all of you here, how has this change affected you? And what specific measures would you like to see from political parties to address this? Would you like to see more support measures, or is the current support enough? Cheryl, maybe we can start off with you with Gen X's.
Well, like most Singaporeans, I feel the pinch as well. I'm also a business owner, so the rising cost of, so when I import things, also I have to pay for the GST on that and stuff like that. So I think that there's a lot of great effort on the government's part with the CDC vouchers and all the rebates as well. But I feel like we need more long-term structured support. And, as much as Y? No,
Yes,
millennials are the so-called sandwich generation between the Gen X and Gen Zs. I would say Gen X is still also quite sandwiched because, our parents are also aging and they're older than your parents, I would say. So there's a lot of concerns I don't have kids, but I know that my brother struggles with that as well. So some support for the sandwich generation, for both sandwiches.
Yep. So for better sandwiches.
Yes, for better sandwiches.
What about for the millennials?
Yeah, so if you look at the GST voucher packages, we have cash for immediate support, MediSave for your seniors, and then we have utilities and then also the conservancy charges. I think what will be helpful for many of the younger millennials who are working, I think will be two fronts, right? One is, especially if you're lower in income, I think more cash support directly to them will help a lot. Especially those who are maybe impacted by loss of jobs or maybe they have some form of wage stagnation. I think more targeted support and cash support will be useful. And the second one is the MediSave support. I think if there is a chance for us, not just millennials, but across the board, to have more MediSave support to encourage people to take charge of their health, right? To get financial support, to do more preventative healthcare, right? My wife is a doctor, so she always monitors what I eat. She makes sure that I does my annual checkup, but not everyone's wife is a doctor. So it might be useful in that sense to kind of create incentives for us to take charge of our health. I think if we can kind of nail these two things right, political parties can kind of see these are the ways that, that we can redistribute some of the gains from the GST hikes. I think that would be very useful for the millennials.
Okay, what about for Gen Zs?
On our end, I would say that I really resonate with what Keith and Cheryl mentioned, whether it's just supporting the lower income people to help them to manage the cost better or also towards the health front. But I would say perhaps something a little bit more special for the Gen Zs is in terms of upskilling. Because for us, I would say that we are in this time where there is so many uncertainties in the job market, and what is important for us is to remain relevant. Yeah, and that also not only help us as individuals, but also as a nation. So that even though we might face a lot of uncertainties overseas, whether is it the US tariffs, we can always stay strong against all of these challenges. So I would say that if the government is able to provide some support in terms of helping us upskill and always remain relevant, I would say that it will be very, very useful.
Okay, so you mentioned Trump tariffs there, and so let's talk about it. I mean, we are navigating a period of considerable global uncertainty with developments such as the Trump-era tariffs highlighting the complex interplay between international policy and domestic well-being, a factor that may warrant closer consideration as we head to the polls. So are these global issues, in particular the Trump tariffs, a huge key factor this time round for voters of your generation to consider, or is it not? Cheryl, you did mention it was one of the top concerns, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I think Singapore has navigated many storms in the past already. So this is no different. We are a tiny nation that's also very dependent on trade. So any of these small ripples become a tidal wave for us. And I feel personally very emboldened by the speeches that I heard recently from Prime Minister Lawrence Wong and Senior Minister Lee Hsien Loong. They both really nailed the topic on the nail on the head, basically. They hit the nail on the head when they highlighted how the U.S. approach to the entire thing basically undermines the whole system that they set up or helped to establish in the first place. And it used to be a plug-and-play situation where, if Singapore is able to weather the storm, we hunker down and then we just go back to business as usual. But now it seems like everything is changing. It can be exciting. It's also very scary. So I'm really looking for strong leadership this time around. And also not just strong leadership, but just someone who can, remind us that our strengths as a nation is also how far we've come, And I really appreciate the sacrifices that the Merdeka generation has given, because look at all the opportunities that we have today. And I even see that with some of the local music that we produce and our local sports talents as well. And that wouldn't have been possible without the sacrifices of the generation before. But moving forward now, and even just echoing both what Kevin and Jing have said, it's like, we want purpose, we want a bit more autonomy, I think, and so that we can navigate this together. It used to be back in the day where it's like we just get spoon-fed and we follow through whatever we're told that we're supposed to do, just be obedient and listen, right? And just do our part. But I think now we want to all kind of know the role that we play individually so that we can come together stronger.
I see. Well, what about you, Keith? What about millennials here? Do these issues matter?
Yeah, I think if I were to echo Cheryl's point, it's like Singapore is small. It's a very trade-dependent, open economy. So, trade is like 300% of our GDP. That's a lot, right? It really shows how trade-dependent we are. So I think voters, when we head to the polls, you might not think of trade fragmentation or tariffs as an issue, but you'll feel the effects on it through your job prospects, through the kind of like wage increases or bonuses you might get, right? Companies become more tentative to employ, so the job market gets tightened. You also have an issue of foreign direct investments. People are less willing to put money abroad now, especially if you're an American MNC. So, for example, manufacturing accounts for 20% of our GDP, right? And a lot of your manufacturing is in high-end manufacturing. You're talking about semiconductors, petrochemicals, things like that. So the moment you don't have open and functioning supply chain, everything gets more expensive. So if 20% of your economy that's so important to contribute to your taxes is hit this hard, there'll be a lot of job losses and job insecurity going forward. Actually, if I were to look at the policy schemes that I hope the different parties will put forward, it's really about helping job seekers and people who will be economically affected to find a footing. So a good example is like they recently launched the Skills Future Job Seeker Support, right? I think it's about $6,000 over 6 months for those who are involuntarily unemployed. What I think would be useful is that if we could expand the scope, so maybe helping millennials who are looking for jobs, even the Gen Zs who might not even have gotten working experience yet, to give them that form of bridging support, and also to increase the income ceiling or the income floor. Right now, it's about less than $5,000 a month, then you get the support. But people who are earning 6-7K might also be affected, right? With this kind of headwinds, I think we should try to expand our support for those people who will be economically impacted. So this is really what I hope the political parties will go forward, looking at the segments who are the most vulnerable to these trade shocks and how we can support them.
Okay. Well, Jing, and what about Gen Zs? Do these global issues matter to Gen Zs?
I mean, definitely. Whatever affects generations will always affect the Gen Zs. I think Keith has given a very comprehensive take on the entire economic situation. So I'll just really focus on what the Gen Zs really would like the help of the other generations, which is I think that fundamentally we really have to work together to really overcome all of these challenges. Right? I mean, for the fact that 3 of us are sitting here together, I think that really shows that we are really concerned not only just about our own generations, but also what are the other generations are going through. So I would really say that if there are different ways where the government can get the generations to work together to have discussions about what is important and perhaps also further discuss about how each generation can use their own strengths and talents to help each other, they'd be very useful.
All right. Well, moving away from Trump tariffs and the global issues here, Singapore has been actively pushing towards sustainability as well, from the Green Plan 2030 to initiatives around clean energy, food security, and waste reduction. So maybe we start off with Jing here and about Gen Zs. How important is a party's environmental stance to Gen Zs when deciding who to vote for? And do you think that the current efforts are ambitious enough to secure a livable future for your generation?
On my end, I will say that the government has been doing a really amazing job in terms of building Singapore as a clean and green city. So I would say that thank you so much really for really making Singapore such a beautiful place to live in. I was speaking to some of my friends recently also. We were actually having this conversation about whether the environment really matters at our current stage. And interestingly, what we all agree on is that yes, sustainability efforts are important, but it is not actually the top of our mind at this current moment because there are so many other issues that we're concerned about. Whether is it getting a job, whether is it can I secure my next BTO. So I would say that is an issue that we have to overcome, but there are also other pressing issues that we would like the government to overcome first, and then we also have to tackle the sustainability issue as we go along the way.
All right. What about Keith? What about the millennials?
Yeah, so if you look at Singapore's footprint into the global carbon footprint, our contribution is 0.11%. So it's really not going to move the needle that much. But if I'm just a millennial who cares about climate change, we look at the government's efforts so far, you kind of understand it in 4 key pillars, right? You have the international efforts, mitigation efforts, adaptation efforts, and green growth opportunities. So if I'm a millennial right now, I'm worried about like what Jing shared before, which is I'm actually worried about the economy. And I think the political parties campaigning this time, I think they'll do really well if they can kind of focus on the adaptation efforts and green growth opportunities. What do I mean? So adaptation efforts really just means how do we build our country to withstand climate change, right? So a good example is heat and flood management. You know, sometimes when it rains heavily, you go down to Orchard Road, everything gets flooded, right? No one can shop in peace. But in this economy, who is shopping, right? So having the infrastructure built in place so that we can reduce the incidents, I think that will play a lot into the minds of voters. And then the second point that I'd like to make is that Singapore has always been at the forefront of securing new economic opportunities. So if you're a party that's looking at the future of climate, why should Singapore should have a seat at the table when it comes to innovation, bringing out new technologies in clean tech, climate, risk management, things like that. So if parties can really do more, to kind of focus where we can improve our adaptation efforts and green growth opportunities, even in this uncertain environment, I think their message will resonate better with voters.
Well, Cheryl, do the sustainability push of Singapore, matter to Gen Xs as well?
Absolutely. I think coming from this generation, and it's interesting to hear how Gen X and millennials feel, but because I was raised by the Merdeka generation, it's like, don't waste your food, make sure you finish everything up. So that has also stayed with me. And because I've written a cookbook, I personally feel that there's a lot of food waste, and Singaporeans are very dependent on ordering out, ordering takeaway. Sometimes you can't really control the portion that you get on your plate. You might waste that, or you're ordering takeaway and there's like a lot of plastics wasted and single-use plastics and that sort of thing. So I feel that we as a very advanced country with all of the amazing things and, as Kevin brought up, that the government is doing for climate change, we as Singaporeans should also play our part and just be more mindful about waste, because we actually do have one of the highest per capita food wastage levels in Asia. I actually have a figure I wrote down, 755,000 tons of food waste. This was in 2023 alone. So just being more conscious, take some time to cook for yourself as well. You can choose ingredients that are more so-called eco-friendly, reduce your consumption of meat. There's all sorts of things that we can adopt as a habit to do our part. So that's just more of on a smaller scale, just on a daily habit sort of thing.
All right. I think we discussed some of the key issues that may be playing out during the campaign period. But for the past couple of weeks, political parties have ramped up, their outreach with communities, whether it be on the ground, meeting voters face to face, door to door, conducting interviews with different media platforms, or even rallying voters on social media. Of course, each voter must do their due diligence, to research and read up on the different policies each political party stands for before they cast their vote. So how do voters of your generation mostly get their information about GE-related issues? How should political parties use those means to their advantage to reach out to your generation? And what should political parties be doing better to connect with your generation? Maybe we start off with the Gen Zs?
Right, sure. So for our Gen Zs, we are definitely on social media, right? And I think that is a very common platform for all of us to access. And I also saw a lot of political parties using social media to engage the different audiences, not only our generation, but also other generations as well. And for myself, I also access different news outlets, for example, Straits Times, etc. And I think these are very good sources for us to understand a little bit more about what is the direction of the political party and what are the goals that they want to achieve. So to the question about how can they better engage us, I would say that for us Gen Zs, we really want to know how they can solve our problem. So we definitely appreciate the stories that they share about their background, but fundamentally we still want to know what is the actionable steps that they can take to really help us solve the different issues. Whether is it being able to solve the rising costs, whether is it solving the BTO issue, etc. If they can really help us to navigate and convince us that they can do a good job, we will definitely be impressed.
All right. What about millennials, Keith?
Yeah, so I think Jing raised up the point on social media. I'd like to take a different angle, which is what is the modern equivalent of a rally today, right? So I think if you go back to 2011, we're used to stadiums, people going out in the grass fields, gathering people. And then COVID came, that didn't really materialize. So what's the modern equivalent today? Maybe it's live events, maybe they'll be hosting people, having town halls. I've seen some parties doing these grassroots outreaches. And hopefully we get to see an evolution of having that face-to-face interaction of political parties going out and canvassing votes in that way. But I think fundamentally what I really like to see from the politicians, it's what's the vision of Singapore that you have, right? There are challenges that will always be there. Like inflation is always going to be here. We're never going to enter a deflationary environment. There will be problems that we'll always have to navigate and grapple with. The question is then, what would an ideal Singapore look like to you? Across the political spectrum, people have different answers, and I think that it's important that people kind of portray that as authentically as possible, be it in person or through social media.
All right, Cheryl?
For my generation, I enjoy listening to podcasts.
Yeah.
So, and I also like that you said live events, because you're right. We haven't had that since COVID, right? And it would be nice to engage with our ministers in our community that way and to really band together and discuss things like right now, like how we're doing. I'm really excited for our future. But how I actually, absorb information and consume information is, okay, so first step is Instagram. So I'll get a quick headline and then I'll be like, ooh, this is interesting. And then that would lead me down either looking for the article on Straits Times, or maybe if it's attached to a podcast, looking for that podcast on YouTube, which is interesting because I like watching my podcast, not listening to it, because I like to see their expressions as well, which is great, which is what Keith does. So go check him out. But yeah, so I don't really engage on TikTok, but I do like that some ministers are reaching out to the youth on TikTok.
All right. I'm a little disappointed. No one said Money FM 89.3. We have GE-related content every day.
That's already expected. We already assume.
Yeah.
We already assume
no worries. I'm just kidding. But yes, do tune into Money FM 89.3. We have great GE-related content. We will keep you up to date on every election details that you need to know before you cast your vote. But on that note, just to wrap up our conversation here, what kind of leader does Singapore need? And if you could advise political leaders from your generation's point of view, what would you say, Cheryl?
Ooh. I was thinking about this, and what's really interesting is if you think of our entire history, Singapore was actually built in crisis. We had to go through colonial rule, Japanese occupation, expulsion from Malaysia, and then racial riots. I mean, so many things have happened in our entire history. And by the way, just to throw this in here, I feel like my personal growth is very much in line with Singapore because I was born 5 days before National Day and 10 years later. Sorry, am I getting the math
later.
right? So I'll be 50 this August.
I can't tell.
Just before National Day. Oh, thank you.
You look like a millennial.
Thanks so much. I don't feel 50, but I feel very excited to be 50 because having, grown up with Singapore in a sense, right? I feel like I understand why we had to be ruled with such an iron fist in the beginning, and we had to have a united sort of single identity to get everyone on board to do what was necessary to build the nation at the time. But as a creative person, I've also felt like when I was growing up that maybe the school system tried to kind of control us to be a little less, outspoken, so to speak. And I'm really encouraged by having, spoken to Keith and Jing today because you guys are just so outspoken and I feel so excited for the future of Singapore. And Jing also mentioned that Gen Zs are wanting purpose. Gen Xers want purpose too. So I think for the future of Singapore, to bridge this gap where Keith also mentioned that there's an aging population problem, Gen Xers are still here. We're not done yet. Don't forget about us. Don't dismiss us. And I think if there is ageism in, certain offices or companies that really need to revisit that, because I have had friends tell me that, they had to change careers and they would not even get an interview just because it said 50 on their application. So, don't discriminate against the older generation. We're still alive and kicking. We have so much to share. And I think that we should all celebrate just how unified we are as Singaporeans, as a multinational, multiracial country. And that's basically what I would like to see moving forward.
So hopefully some of our political parties are tuning in. What about millennials? What would you advise our political leaders?
Yeah, I only can speak for myself, but I think if I were to ask what kind of leader I really look up to and respect, would be to use Lee Kuan Yew's words, which is to have the iron in him. Whoever wants to govern Singapore must have the iron in him. So we're looking for leaders of character and strong character, especially in such turbulent times. And back to Cheryl's point, I think we really need unity and diversity, not just in race, culture, but also like what she shared about age, right? As more Singaporeans are aging, we also can deploy their talents in a very effective way that will make our economy, our society much more vibrant and flourish better. And I think the last point is to be authentic but serious, meaning like we really enjoy when a politician can, crack out the guitar sometimes or crack a few jokes or go up and dance in a while or do a few dances on TikTok. But I think that shouldn't be their main job. We as voters should look at their policy proposals. We should take a serious view. And as politicians, we hope that whoever's running, that you provide a clear and articulate vision of what you think Singapore should be. And I think that's what this GE is about.
Fair enough. Well, Jing, what about for Gen Zs?
Well, I would say that, for us, we are really grateful that we grew up in such a time where there's so many opportunities for us, as I've earlier mentioned. But yet, at the same time, there is so much uncertainty that we are going to face. 5 years ago, we had a pandemic. Now we are in a political landscape that is so uncertain. But yet, at the same time, I think that is also very exciting because that means that there's so many more things that we cannot expect and perhaps even more opportunities for Singapore. Right? I think as what Cheryl mentioned, that Singapore is born from crisis, or rather we have risen through different crises. But I do not think that that should be something that we take for granted. Just because we did it in the past, it doesn't mean that we can do it again. So rather than just resting on our laurels, our government, our leaders really need to step up to the game so that they can overcome the future challenges that could be even more complex, even more challenging. But I'm confident that we can do it. Right, but just 3 points from me if I were to summarize what a good leader in Singapore can be, at least for us in the Gen Z perspective. The first one, resilient. I think that's very clear-cut because we are living in a world that is so uncertain. Our leaders must be able to overcome any adversities to tide Singapore through all of these challenges. Secondly, flexible, right? Because there is so many different challenges that they have to face. It could be a virus, it could be the economy, it could be the people. So they must really be able to employ different strategies in order to overcome and find a solution that can hopefully satisfy everyone. And the last one, which I think is really, really important, especially for this GE, is the idea of empathy. I think empathy is so important because it's not only just looking out for one single generation, but it is for all generations and also for future generations. So our leaders must not only be present looking, but also forward looking, because it is not just about 2025, it is also about the next 40 years until we reach SG100 and even beyond.
Right, that was amazing. Well, thank you so much for all of you for coming down and joining in on this discussion. I think we've gotten great insights from all of you on how the different generations think and what they're looking for this year's general election. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so
And you should buy
much.
Cheryl's book. You should buy Cheryl's cookbook. I'll have to buy it now since she plugged my podcast.
Yes, and most importantly, please tune in to Money FM 89.3.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for joining us. We've been speaking to Tan Jing, who is a Gen Z public speaker, Keith Yap, who's the founder of the Front Row podcast, as well as Cheryl Miles, who's the founder of Miles Nixon Media. This has been The Hot Seat, where it's not just about winning an argument, but about understanding the complex layers that underpin today's hottest topics. This has been your GE2025 panel discussion. Now check out the full video out on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube as well. And for now, I've been your host, Hongbin Jeong.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.